Wow. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coaches Corner Health. We're closing out the year. My name is Leslie. I'm Coach Leslie. I work with women mainly, and I help my clients with achieving a healthy balance with their emotions as it pertains to their thoughts, their feelings, and their beliefs, because usually that's where we come from. So they can have that better responses to those moments when usually flip out, but instead they become more consciously aware of the things that are managing them. So that's me in a nutshell. Hey, Andy,
Hi,
welcome.
Leslie. I love these conversations that we have. I'm Coach Andy, the unconditional coach. I help people find what's missing in their life. I help people find the life they're looking for, really find what it is that they don't know they want.
Mm.
And I help them do that through boundaries mostly, although there are other tools that I use as well. But boundaries is the biggest thing I do. So I thank you for your introduction, and I love these conversations. I just love how we connect, how we've been connecting for almost a year now. We were just talking about it's been April that we started, so it's been a while. Like this is a 2021 wrap up. Actually seems significant. Like we're not just talking about a few episodes here. We're talking a lot of things we've covered.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we don't prepare for these, but I did actually go back through and wrote them all down from the beginning to
Hmm.
now, and it's just really amazing and kind of neat to see the progression of like how we started it and how we started like moving into the topics and moving through the different topics and how they really kind of went together. It's like it seemed like a really good flow. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to like go back and walk through memory lane. But we first started, this is just really like where we first started was we started talking about relationships and expectations, and that's exactly the very first episode because we wanted to really just kind of have like a brief conversation, well, as brief as Andy and I can do. But we wanted to have like a brief conversation around relationships, the expectations that we have around our relationships, whether they're romantic or whether they're friendships, whether they're work colleagues, whatever that looks like. And we kind of talked a little bit about that. And so it was kind of, as I said, really interesting for me to go back and look through how what we covered and the flow that we took.
Hmm. It was it this started, I think, because you and I were having a conversation. I believe it was for your Facebook group. We were having a conversation. Mind you, we'd had a whole bunch of conversations on the mastermind that I had started. So we were familiar with each other and how we talk. And you decided, and I agreed that some of the conversations that we have just seem so profound. You know, it's not so much that I'm wise or you're wise or we have individual wisdom, but when we bring ideas up together, it pulls things out that neither one of us would have really thought about or considered on our own. So it's really about the collaboration between the two of us, that chemistry that we have when we're talking about conversation. We can we can create a level of connection,
Mhm.
professional connection, a level of friendship, a level of really understanding, almost like a wisdom of us. Our brains coming together, and we find things that really can make a difference in a person's life,
Yeah,
which is why we started this
absolutely.
channel in the first place.
Yeah, and you're right. It did start. So, uh, Andy and I have known each other for a few months before I had asked him to come into my women's group in Facebook. It's called Transform Your Triggers for Success Community, and it is around. We talk about mindset, our emotions, becoming emotionally aware, and also obviously I talk a lot about self love and the importance of it. But I really wanted to bring Andy into the group because there were questions being asked by some of the women that I had talked to. Some of them were clients, and it was around relationships. And of course, I'm one half of a relationship. And so I asked Andy to come in, and we just had a conversation talking about, men and women, expectations around that. And so it was probably one of my most favorite interviews I had ever done in the group. And I realized that we were onto something in our conversation and how that could really translate into something like this.
Yeah.
And so was born Coach's Corner, and Coach's Corner Health. And that's why I believe that this is such a great collaboration, because we can come together as coaches, and we have our own area of expertise that we both lean into, but we have those similarities. And I felt like this kindred connection that was really, really good, that I thought this would be a great collaboration. And so I reached out to Andy and said, let's do this, and he was on board for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the idea for a lot of reasons. Conversations between men and women have been a passion of mine for many, many years. Relationships. Men and women tend to have, or tend to create, a difficulty around conversations. We tend to have expectations. We tend to, believe we don't understand each other. We believe there's some kind of disconnect. And my experience in talking to women myself is that women aren't that strange. I mean, they're a little different than us, but they're people. I mean, there's blood running through your veins too, just like there is in mine. So we're using the same language. We can communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we lose some of those expectations, or at least reformat some of those expectations and reframe some of those expectations, we can have great communication. So when you brought this idea up to me, I thought, wait a minute, here's a woman who wants to continue to have conversations. And it's a woman who I have had great conversations with already. I think there's something here. I think there's a magic here. Let's at least explore this for a short time to see where it goes, because I see a potential here that we could become something like somewhat of a force for relationships. We could help people, men and women, communicate.
Yeah.
And then the second level to that is that I thought was actually as equally significant as you being a woman and me being a man, is that you're married, and married for a long time. Like, you've been married for many, many years, nearly 3 decades.
Mm-hmm.
That's a significant. And I'm single. I was married, and I have been separated for 6 years from my ex-wife. I did date a girl in there for a year or two, but I'm single. So there is that perspective of, a married person and a single person, and what relationships might look like in those different dynamics as well. And I think we've explored both of those worlds, the man and the woman and the single and married. I think we've explored those dimensions quite deeply in the conversations we've had so far. And I really like how we've delved into some of these subjects.
Yeah. I agree. And I think we both came to the conclusion, of course, which is, it's not rocket science. It is common sense. But I think because when you're in the middle of something, you don't really necessarily want to think about it being common sense, or you don't really see all of that. But men and women really are trying to say the same things. It's just how we go about saying it, the words we use, the body language, the emotions. It's still coming back to the same thing. And it's not only are we saying the same things, but we also have the same wants and desires to be heard and understood. And I think if men and women could actually come to that understanding, I think relationships could be a little bit more, where people would understand each other better and be able to communicate better in a way that actually makes the relationships better. But it really does take responsibility, because it's not just about, well, he should do this or she should do this because I'm doing this. It's really about taking responsibility for what you bring to the table, what you bring into the relationship, how you react, how you respond, how you navigate the relationship. so that you can inspire, if that's your, inspiring yourself to show up a certain way can also inspire someone else. Like, whoa, okay, so this person is coming into the relationship with me, they're meeting me halfway, and we can talk about it. We don't always have to agree. And I think part of that too is understanding that piece, because we're not always going to agree. And we've had disagreements about
Mhm.
things, but it's life, because that's just who we are. We're humans. And so we all have our own opinion, but we also understand each other, that it's not about who's right, who's wrong. It's just about having the conversation so that other people can start thinking about what that conversation could look like for them, whether it's romantic, whether it's a friendship, whether it's family, like a family dynamic, because people are now going into the holidays, or whether it's professional, like a business relationship, and just learning how to talk with each other. And I think you and I both have said that we've both learned a lot from these conversations, which has helped both of us in how we interact with the people in our lives.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. And back to what you said a moment ago about the each person taking responsibility and not expecting the other person to fix whatever's wrong. Um, I think that you and I are really good at that. That we have come into this conversation because of the work we've done, both as coaches and being coached by our own coaches. We've done a lot of work at taking responsibility for our own communication, for how we feel, for how we present, for how we show up. And therefore, when we go into a conversation, we can um, have our own thoughts, have our own feelings, and take responsibility for those. We can disagree. We can also agree a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We can come together. We can connect. We can communicate. We can converse. We can understand. We really can, because we're not trying to be understood so much, because we feel understood more often, because we're not trying to be understood. We can actually put the effort on the other person and try and understand. I can
Mm-hmm.
focus on you, you can focus on me, because I have already focused on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I have already understood who I am and what I bring and what I do,
Mm-hmm.
and so have you. And therefore, because that already exists, I can then secondarily put some effort into trying to understand what your point is, what you're trying to say, as you do for me. And I think that's what makes these conversations magical, is because we do ground in our self identity first, our individual identities of who we are individually as coaches, as professionals, as people. Then, once we understand that, we can take that into a conversation and try from that perspective to understand somebody else's point of view, somebody else's understanding of things. And that's the magic that builds wonderful conversations, the kinds of conversations that you and I have been able to have on this channel. And we're going to give some examples of some of the conversations that we've had and some of our favorites. We're going to bring those up in a few minutes. But that's, I think, what part of the magic has been, is that you and I have been able to understand ourselves first, and therefore have enough mental and emotional energy left to try and understand each other. And it's
Mm-hmm.
been great conversations. It has resulted in some wonderful epiphanies and some great wisdom coming out of this channel.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I also, one of the things I think is really amazing about these conversations that we have is that we really don't prepare for them, other than we
Yes.
know the topic. We kind of have an idea of where we want to go with it, but there's no pre planning ahead of time with scripting. There's no pre planning ahead of time with bullet points that we want to talk about. It's just really off the cuff conversations. And I think part of that, like you said, it's knowing ourselves, who we are, uh, who we show up in the world as, being in this space both as coaches and the people that we serve in the industry that we're in, and being open to new ideas. Like, I've learned a lot from you around boundaries, and just understanding, because a lot of, and that's one of my favorites, which I definitely want to talk about. But boundaries and understanding the differences between, what I thought was a boundary was really more of a barrier. So that is something I definitely want us to like touch on. But just the conversations have just, even though they've been pre-planned out as far as what we're going to talk about, there hasn't been like pre-planned questions or bullet points that we have to cover. We just start talking and we let ourselves lead the way, which
Right.
is really amazing. And that is just comes from a level of confidence of the work we've both done, being coached by other coaches, being supportive of one another in the masterminds that we're a part of.
Mhm.
And I really truly think that because of that, it's helped us both to grow and become even better at what we do. So I think it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly it. We've both done our own work. We've both been able to show up to these conversations the way we want to. We both have the confidence to know that what we're talking about really is something that we can communicate, that we can share, that we can come from, that we can, that we can really can create understanding around. These are conversations that we do understand about each other and about ourselves. And like the boundaries conversation, I really enjoy some of the questions that you brought up around cultural differences, around the different experiences that you and some of your clients have had around the differences in culture, men and women, and business expectations, and and the idea of what a person does when they come to America, and all of this stuff. I really love the conversations that we're having around that. Some of my favorites were those cultural conversations because they're conversations that, although are happening in our world right now, I don't think they're happening between people necessarily that can bridge those gaps. And I think that's something that you and I really want to address going forward as well. That's one of the subtopics that we want to bring up more often.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and boundaries, obviously, that's that's something that I've been playing with for years now. It's my central focus, right? That's what I do is I teach boundaries. And yeah, the idea of boundaries versus barriers, the idea of a barrier being a wall we set up to protect ourselves, and boundaries being the thing we use to teach people how we want to be treated, or how we want to be, to be interacted with. Um, that's it's been a significant change in my life. It's created um, a lot of relationships. It's created a lot of space for relationships by reducing the amount of time and energy I was wasting on certain other relationships. So yeah, that's really great. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is the second evolution. So we did a few conversations, two or three conversations. I don't remember specifically how many, that were just around relationships and the expectations around relationships. And we very quickly got into this idea of, wait a minute, there's kind of three different main topics we're covering here. And that is the social expectations, the relationship expectations, and the personal expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And the social expectation being much more cultural, much more, big picture and society stuff. And then we got into the relationships, which is not just romantic relationships, but relationships between small numbers of people, often just two people, but sometimes, a small number of people, four or five people. And then we got into the deepest subject, our personal expectations, the things that we do, or that we expect, or that we desire, or that we create for ourselves. And I love the evolution of that. It really helped to cover a lot of the different subjects that I think both of us really like to talk about.
Yeah, well, and you brought up this cultural expectations and the cultural differences, and I think one of the things about that, which is really fascinating to me, was the differences not only in like as I had talked about in I can't remember which, I think it might have been the cultural differences one that we were talking about, me being a person who would go from I grew up in Canada. I was born in the US, but I grew up in Canada. And then when I got married, my husband and I had moved down to the US back in 96, and we were there for 12 years. And just seeing the differences of just how I found people interacted with each other uh, on a professional level. And then just the differences in how law firms, because that was my area of work, how they were different in Canada in the way that they interacted with the assistants and the lawyers, and the differences in the U.S. But then on top of that, there was also the differences in how, when I grew up in Canada, just talking about this real briefly, when I grew up in Canada, which was for the first 33 years of my life, because although I had been born in the U.S., I lived in Canada from when I was a baby up until I was 33. And so for me, I didn't grow up with a lot of the racial tensions that happen in the U.S. A little bit. I'd had some, but I could count that on one hand. But I know if I'd grown up in the US, it might have been a little different. So I noticed the difference of how people interacted with each other when it came to um, ethnic differences and cultural differences, and how like what you looked like, the way that you, whether it was your religion, whatever it was about your culture, and how you brought it to the front and how you showed it to the world. In the US, even though it is a big pot of different people, like different cultures, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. But the difference between Canada and the US, which is what I was finding was really fascinating to me, is that when I crossed over into the US, I immediately felt a shift. And I can't even explain it. But coming back into Canada, when I was back in Canada, I also noticed the shift, which was I no longer thought about it. Whereas I thought about being different when I was in the US. And that is a really odd thing to even say or to even think about. Because as I said, for the first 33 years of my life, I didn't grow up with that. My mom's white, as a spoiler. Like, my mom's white, my dad is black. I have two younger brothers who also look like me. I have an older brother who's white, my mom's first marriage. And so I grew up with like both, but not because my mom raised us. So I didn't really have as much of an influence from the Black community, except through some relatives and some of my mom's friends. But it still wasn't the same as if I had grown up in the US. So it was very different for me to experience some of the differences that people really felt on a daily basis when I went into the US and started seeing some of those things. Not necessarily that I was experiencing them, but I could see some of it happening. So it was really interesting. You are muted.
Yes, I am, because I went away from the camera for a second. Yes, and they are really interesting because the cultural differences. I have experienced cultural differences just within my own region, just within my own province, because I'm also in Canada, and I haven't experienced them nearly to the level that many other people have. And it's a part of our society that I'm very, very interested in, want to know more about. Again, because I'm an unconditional coach, partly because I choose and teach and follow unconditional love, which means I love all people. And so the cultural differences allow me to do that. And that's where I resorted to my specialty around boundaries to really decide how I want other people to see me, to view me. I use boundaries to create the reputation that I want other people to have. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the reputation other people have, or what other people thinks of me, is under my control, or it really is any of my business. But I do create boundaries to try and influence how people see me, or at least how people interact with me. So the cultural differences is something I want to be seen, to be known, to be recognized as somebody who wants to understand, doesn't want to take for granted, and yet still wants to treat everybody as equally as I'm allowed to, as I'm able to. I don't want to have differences, and I think that's one of the things that you and I have brought up in our cultural conversations is that although there are differences in our societies and how some people treat each other or other people, or how some people expect to be treated themselves by the people around them. There are cultural differences. It's a really delicate situation on how to deal with that. And one of the things that I brought up in some of our conversations was your difference, your experience, your different experience from Canada to the U.S. I haven't experienced that because I've never been to the U.S. myself. So what my intellectual explanation was, and it was just trying to come up with a logical reason for it, is I remember studying social studies when I was a young man, probably grade 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. And they talked about how the US had a melting pot and Canada is a multicultural, whereas the US historically tries to amalgamate everyone into a common, culture, whereas Canada prefers to honor each individual person's culture or each individual culture as their own. It does create a bit of a different experience in either country. Although there's a lot of similarities, there is that significant difference. And like I said, I've never experienced the States, so I don't know what that actually looks like. But that is one of my logical, intellectual reasons that I can create for why that might happen. And again, those cultural conversations helped us to really delve into that subject and really helped us to explore some of those dynamics. And I really, really enjoyed those conversations. They were some of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I think that is just knowing, and I think what was really cool about that is that we actually segued into stereotyping, because that was also part of, I think, the cultural experience, is being stereotyped by how you look, maybe by how you speak, maybe you have an accent, maybe it's the language. Again, it could be where you're from. It also could be your social, your social standing. Like maybe you grew up, maybe you live in, and I'm just going to say this, but I've heard people say, trailer park, and I'm thinking, so what? But people will look and frown upon someone who grew up in a trailer park, and there's this whole stereotype around what that even means. And to me, that's it's silly, because then you also have, on the flip side, people call it the silver spoon, right?
Yeah.
Someone grows up rich. And so we have these stereotypes of people. And so no wonder there's a lot of disconnect between different cultures, between different social standing, I guess, for people who have money, who don't have money, because they automatically bring to their conversation, or to their relationship, their interaction, these stereotypes are already in the back of their mind. And it's not because they're necessarily thinking, okay, what stereotype can I bring? It's because as we are children, we are influenced by everything around us, by our teachers, our peers, our parents, our siblings, whatever that is, we learn. And so we learn some of these things, to our expectations around cultures, our expectations around the differences in people. So it was really fascinating when we started talking about the stereotyping. And we segued into so many great conversations. I mean, it was just phenomenal, as
Yes.
it pertained to culture. And that's one of my favorite areas for us to like talk about. And I think because there's just so much that we can still cover,
Yeah.
because I believe that there's a lot of, because of what I do, I talk about mindset and emotional awareness. A lot of mindset, or our beliefs, I believe, are passed down to us, whether it's from our generation before us, the generation before them. Even our parents might not be holding on to those cultures, but maybe our grandparents are trying to pass down those things.
Yeah.
And if you throw in the mix that they're also culturally come from a different background, that is another part of it. So you have this cultural and this generational belief that gets passed on. And it's, as a child, you're learning these things and you're thinking, well, is that right? Is it not right? One of the things that you said back in one of our conversations was, you could have a group of friends and you meet somebody, just in passing, or somebody that you work with. Maybe you're walking down the road, or you're somewhere with your friends, and you run into this person that's completely outside of the group of friends that you're hanging with, that's completely different from them. And they might not vibe with this person, but it's how you vibe with the person is what became more important to you. And that's why I believe, like, for me, it's mindset and emotional awareness is really important. But I think also, as I said, I also bring in a really big piece, which is self-love. And the reason why I talk about it, and people have probably heard self-love, and they're thinking like, I've heard that term used so often. Maybe they're sick of hearing the term. Maybe they don't really fully understand it. But my interpretation around self love really has been because of the journey I was on, learning that self love is learning to love yourself, the reflection of you, without expectations of being better or worse, without expectation of that you look a certain way or you don't look a certain way, but having no judgment or criticism of yourself. But then, if you want more, if you want better, then you will look for those ways that are going to empower you to do that.
Yeah.
And that way too is that you're able to then, if you can look at yourself without those boundaries on yourself, or those barriers that you put up, walls that you put up, not letting other people in because you don't think you're worthy or deserving. But if you can let those walls go, if you can let those barriers go, you'll find that you'll get this deeper sense of how you want to be loved and how you want to be treated. But it gives you a better understanding of what love really is, because you can actually, you realize that because you love yourself, you know what that, how important that is, and start looking for those relationships of someone who can love you the way you want to, and you know that you can love someone else. And it's it's a hard topic to explain, but when you go through steps, when you go through exercises, when you go through the process, you come out on the other end realizing, oh, so really all it is for me to find love the way I want to be loved, and for me to love someone the way I want to love them, it starts with me. And that's really what it is. And so that's why I do what I do. And partly too, because as you mentioned, I have been married for almost 26 years. Has it been easy? No. But what has been good is because I got into this space, it's taught me a lot about who I am. It's given me tools. It's shown me that I'm important, and I've learned to love myself, so that now I understand. I have ways of learning to listen better, because that's part of it too. Learning to understand, listen to understand my partner's point of view is not meant to always harm me emotionally, but before, that's how I always thought. And now I've been able to I make better decisions in my responses, whereas before, anything that I felt was a personal attack because I didn't love myself, I came from a different place. So that's why I do what I do, and I really love it, because I realized that's, for me, the journey that I needed to be on, so that I could then start walking the walk, talking the talk, and helping other people do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree completely. I agree completely. And the the relationship conversations that we had to transition to the next section that we did, you kind of brought that up. You evolved from the culture conversations we have been having into the personal ones, and then back to the relationship ones again. A lot of those conversations that we did have helped me to understand more clearly the dynamics of the relationships I have had, the dynamics of the romantic relationships that I've had, the friendships that I do have, the collaboration relationships, the professional relationships, the family members. I've been able to create much more effective boundaries around my professional life, around my personal life, and with myself, because of the conversations that we've had under that relationships category. We were able to talk about things like, why don't men talk about their emotions? Why don't, what is a good woman? We were able to talk about whether or not you should be married, whether or not that piece of paper even means anything. Like, by some of those conversations really affected how I view myself, how I view the people that I've been in relationship with, and the people I am currently in relationship with. And it's really been able to, it's really helped me to really nail down some of these concepts around boundaries or um, control issues or some of these social things that I'm dealing with my clients, families and relationships and jobs and all kinds of stuff. Some of these conversations that we had in that relationships category really helped me to really understand what I was trying to say. You and I had thought out some thoughts. We'd really talked out some thoughts in those conversations, and it really narrowed some stuff down for me. It really helped me to understand where I was coming from and where I was going, and it helped me to find some focus. It really disrupted my um, mental space, my understanding of what I was doing so much that it was about 3 or 4 months in there that I wasn't doing much because I was kind of reformulating what I stand for as a coach, what I teach as a coach, who I help, and what I do for them. And and quite honestly, toward the end of that 3 or 4 months, there was a few clients who decided they didn't want to be my clients anymore, and there was a few other people who decided, wait a minute, I want to be your clients now, right? So I evolved as a man, as a person, as a coach through some of these conversations that we have, and it's been absolutely wonderful to watch that evolution of myself, and the conversations that has brought that through for me. So, yeah, that's been great.
Yeah, and I love that because I think the one thing about, like you were saying, you're a single man, and maybe you have someone in your life, and I'm married, but I think what's really good is that we can meet each other right here. Like it doesn't, just because I'm married doesn't mean I have all the answers. And because you're single doesn't mean that you have all the answers on that you shouldn't marry. Because you did talk about, we had one conversation that we talked about, which was to marry or not to marry. And part of it, I think, was because I started doing some digging a little bit. I didn't do prep. I was just checking around to see what was like social norms for people. And I noticed, even before I got married, I know a lot of people were not getting married um, until later in their life. Like I said, I got married at 33. And I know that some people choose not to marry. In fact, choose not to marry at all because they feel that they've made the emotional commitment to that person in their life, that making it, as they would say, legal, um, with a piece of paper, going to the courts and registering that they are officially a couple. They don't feel that that was necessary, and so it was kind of interesting to me because then part of the reason why I had said to you I was really interested in this topic was the a lot of the young people, and it's not even just the young people anymore, because I've noticed it's a trending way of describing the person in your life that I'm noticing across the board is everyone calls that person in their life their partner, even if you're married. I've noticed that.
Yeah.
It's no longer my husband, my wife, my girlfriend, my boyfriend. It's my partner. And which
Mhm.
was very fascinating to me. And that's why I wanted to talk about it. But I also, and it was interesting because I don't know how this trend began. Was it because to have inclusion of same sex relationships? And if that was the case, I completely understand that. But it was just interesting to me when I started looking at that. Okay, my partner became more of the wording to use to describe someone in your life on a romantic level, but also knowing that a lot of people are choosing to forego the marriage certificate and just be emotionally committed. And so for them, that, I mean, that's what they've decided works for them. And I'm still curious as to, if this is, if like, is it across the board, men and women, or is it more one sided? I'm not sure. That's a conversation I'd love to maybe revisit.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to revisit that conversation. Actually, I'd love to revisit many of the conversations that we had. Um, Many of them are conversations that, as we said in the moment, we could never contain within an hour, and we were right. We couldn't and didn't contain them within an hour. There was many things that we still want to say on those subjects, and that is definitely one of those ones that I, for one, still have plenty to say, and obviously you still have plenty to say too. Um, and I believe we will revisit these conversations. That's actually going to be what we talk about on our next show, is what our intentions are for the coming year. So I'll leave that up for all of you to wonder and be curious about what we're going to be bringing up on that show. For now, we're still talking about what we did this year, and I really like that to marry or to not to marry conversation was one of my favorites also, because we delved into a number of the cultural differences, a number of the personal differences. We talked about a lot of the jobs of a man in the home or a woman in the home. We talked about a lot of the expectations. We talked about a lot of what it means to be married, or what it means to be a couple, or we had so much to talk about in that conversation, and there's no way we could have contained it within an hour. Um, yeah, so yeah, you have my vote to let's revisit that one again. So, but yeah, I agree. And another one that I really liked within this category was: does your significant other define you? Do we let our partner decide who we are? That come up in a couple of different contexts. One, oftentimes one partner, historically the man, but becoming more and more the women, one partner has a strong external position within the family. So they're a political person, or they're a corporate person, and they have a strong reputation. Maybe they're a strong member of a political party, or they're a higher up in a bigwig company, or something like that. Like they have a strong position, and their partner, traditionally the wife, but more and more becoming the man as well, um, would live in the shadow of their partner. So they would go to balls and galas and parties, and the partner would be just kind of the accessory for the main person who was there. And also, another way that it came up too was sometimes we would define our own value or our own positions within the household based on what our partner expected us to do or expected us to become. So, oftentimes we would define ourselves based on what we thought they wanted or what we hoped they wanted. So that was one of my favorite conversations. Does your significant other define who you are? And the very fact that we called it a significant other is um, is evidence of the thing you were just talking about with the word partner becoming prevalent. The very idea that we called it significant other rather than spouse or partner or husband or wife or whatever. We use significant other to be more generic and allow different kinds of partnerships and different kinds of relationships. Because in that conversation, we were talking about a variety of different kinds of relationships. It wasn't just necessarily the husband and the wife. Yet we did. I love that we talked about the identifications that we put on, and sometimes those identifications come from our partner, as in they ask us to be this person, and sometimes we define ourselves based on them when that's not necessarily what they wanted. I might decide that I'm the what do you call it, Mr. Mom who stays home with the kids, but my wife would rather we both worked. We both had advancing careers, and we both had our individual identities. Or sometimes I might ask my wife to be my plus one when we go to these galas, and I'll be the main figure. So sometimes we do ask, and sometimes we'd rather that it was something different. So it's not always the more prominent partner who is requesting that definition. Sometimes it's the more in the shadows partner who's actually creating that definition. And we talked about all of that. It was such a wonderful conversation that allowed allowed us to delve into some conversations, into some topics that I don't think people talk about nearly as much as I think we could.
Yeah, and that one led right into probably one of my most favorites of the year, which was boundaries, because yeah, I mean, it really kind of just lends to that a little bit more because your significant other, again, we did talk about, to me, that meant more really around romantically connected. But, I'd love to actually expand on that, whether it's friendships, whether it's your peers, whether it's your professional relationships.
Yeah.
Those are some topics I want to touch on. But boundaries really stuck with me a lot because I feel like there's this thing about knowing and understanding what you're doing, and a lot of the time people don't really understand the differences. And I really loved this because this was more like, this showed your authority on this topic, because this is what you do. And I really enjoyed like just getting into the idea of what a boundary could be, and the difference, because again, before I got into this space, which I said a little bit earlier in the show, was that me as a person was just a wife, whether it's before I got married, in any relationship, the boundaries, if I put them up, necessarily were not boundaries. They were actually barriers, but I understood it as being a boundary. So boundaries to me meant protection, not, and it was all rolled up into it, was it, whether it's protection or it's how close you could get, or how, if it's a wall up, or if you're allowed so close but only so close. And so just coming into that understanding around the actual differences, I mean, I start out, over time I've understood a little bit more what the differences are. But I think just getting to know you more and our conversations we've had around this topic, with the things that you have coming up that you're working on, I know this is really exciting. This is a really great and exciting topic. And that's one of the things why, even though we don't really promote ourselves, but Andy does have this really great podcast, and he talks about boundaries and the differences and how to use them. And so it's really an exciting topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for those people who are wondering, the podcast is called Unconditional Boundaries. We're not going to put a link here or put any promotional stuff in here. If you want to listen to it, you can go look it up. That's fine. Boundaries are boundaries are something. When I was exploring this concept, this first exploring this idea, sorry, excuse me. When I was first exploring this idea of boundaries, I was talking to my coach one day, and I said, I had this concept that I'm really thinking about, this idea of boundaries that I don't think is really how most people understand it. I have this idea that boundaries are meant to help us connect. They're the guidelines we create to teach people how we want to be treated. I don't think they're meant to create safety. I think too many people are using boundaries to make themselves safe, and they're like, "You can't do this to me," but that doesn't feel like a boundary to me. That feels more like a command or a demand or even a barrier or a wall. So, and I said to her, I think this is a subject I want to delve into a little more. And then on the very next call with her, I said, "Yeah, actually, I think I've actually," because I was mulling it over for that whole week, and I came up with this idea of boundaries versus barriers, and I described him using a hockey analogy, and that the barriers are the walls and around the rink where the players and puck aren't allowed to go and are actually physically forced, physically prevented from crossing. So is the audience. The spectators are physically prevented from going onto the ice through that wall. So are the players who aren't actively participating in the game. Now, there are doors. You can put doors in walls and barriers. You can allow access past them, but they are the thing that separates what is and what is not. And then I used the idea of the lines on the ice as the boundaries. The boundaries aren't so much physical as they are ethereal or energetic, as in on the hockey arena, they are physical. You can see them, but they don't actually stop the puck or the players from going anywhere. They simply let people cross them as much as they want. And what happens is the actions change. The actions of the other team, the actions of your team, the rules might change. The consequences might change. When you cross the red line that is between the goalposts, there is a goal. Somebody gets a point. When you cross the blue lines, depending on where the puck is, there might be a difference in the rules or a difference in the play, or the play might stop. But you can cross them. You can still cross them as freely as you want to. When I started explaining to my coach this idea of boundaries versus barriers, and I used that analogy, she said to me that she had never heard of boundaries explained in such a way, and that it was very, very powerful to hear it in such a way. And that was the first moment that I knew that I had something really significant to share with the world. I thought, wait a minute, this is how I actually live my life. I don't want to create barriers with people unless I feel some sort of a threat. And I don't feel as many threats as you might think. I'm not threatened by as many things as most people are. So I don't want to create barriers between myself and most people, even those most people who might be considered threatening from others. And I started exploring this topic a lot more, and it became very, very significant to me that most people were setting up barriers and calling them boundaries. That most people were trying to create safety but with boundaries, and that even my own children were setting up boundaries by creating barriers, by trying to restrict what the people in their lives were allowed to do. And I thought, wait a minute, this is why we're disconnecting. This is why our world is so divisive. This is why we're not having the conversations or the relationships or the lifestyle that we really want to have. This is what's going on with our society. Somebody created this concept of boundaries and actually started putting up walls. So I really started to delve into that and coach around that and make that a key component of my own coaching with my clients and some of the conversations I was having with other coaches. So when it came to that conversation that you and I had, it was really significant to talk about it and share those concepts, those ideas that boundaries actually are brilliant ways to connect. They are how we teach people what we'd like to have, not what our expectations are, not what our rules are, not what our demands are, but what we'd like to have. Because what I know is most people want to help everybody they know, or at least most people they know. Most people are helpful. Most people are generous. Most people are kind. If I explain to someone how I want to be treated, they'll be relieved because now they know how to make me happy. They know how to give me what I'm looking for. Now they know what the rules are, what the guidelines are. They know what the expectations are. And if they don't feel like it, they don't have to do it. And if they do feel like it, they can do it. So it really changed how I started thinking about relationships. And it was one of the reasons that you and I were able to connect so easily, is because we created these boundaries in our relationship. We created some expectations about what we could or could not do, and then we created boundaries around the things we wanted. We created boundaries around, this is how I want to be treated. This is how you want to be treated. And we decided that each of us wanted to treat each other in that way. I wanted to treat you according to your boundaries, and you wanted to treat me according to my boundaries. And guess what? Magic happened. And it seems complicated. It seems magical. It seems like there was just this chemistry between us. But actually, it was boundaries. It was just a set of guidelines. It was just understanding what I'd like and what you'd like. It was just creating that understanding. Between boundaries and communication is what created this relationship that you and I have. And I would challenge that almost anybody, I'm not going to say anybody because there are some people who probably just can't do that, but I would challenge that almost anybody, most people could using communication and boundaries can create nearly any relationship they want. And that's the power of that conversation. I agree with you. It was also one of my favorite conversations, and it changed so much for me. That entire concept of boundaries just changed so much for me.
Well, I don't know, but I would say like mic drop there, okay? Because well, first of all, that's the very first time I've heard the hockey analogy, and I think it's
Really?
phenomenal. I love it. And I think that it just really brings it home and explains it in a way that is extremely understandable. Even if you don't know the rules of hockey, it doesn't matter because you just understand the concept of there being, if you've seen a hockey rink, if you haven't, look one up and you can see what he's talking about with the lines, the division, the blue line, the red line. You've got the goalie section. It's again, when you cross over into the goalies area, then there's consequences, but they are not meant that you can't cross over. And what I loved about that so much was that it was just easy to understand. And yeah, it's a powerful way to explain it in simple terms that people can understand, regardless of whether they know the game of hockey. And I just love that. And I think partly, yeah, I mean, that's why it's one of my favorite conversations. And it lends into something that I also talk a lot about, being really important to learning about boundaries, to learning about your emotions, to learning about mindset and self love, is being an active participant in your life. I like to call it getting into your story. And I use the football analogy. So for me, what I say for life is that getting into your story is like if you didn't and you're sitting on the sidelines, you're a football team and you're sitting on the sidelines, you're the quarterback of your team, you're the quarterback of your life, but you decide to take a day off, decide to take your life off, and you go and you sit on the bench and you allow your team members. Now I'm talking about the offensive line, because the defensive line pretty much they know what they're doing. They have that kind of, but not necessarily that they understand the rules, because if they don't see you taking the lead to move forward, they're going to always be in defense mode, thinking, meaning your players, you being your defense team, you're always going to be looking for ways to like watch out for the obstacles, block the obstacles. But I use the football analogy, saying that if you're letting life happen to you rather than for you, where you're not getting into your game, you've decided to let your team members make all the plays. You've got every player on your offensive line just trying to figure out who to throw the ball to, when to throw the ball, where to throw the ball, how far, to try to move your life forward. Making those baby steps, but to get closer to the goal, the end zone. To score. Then all you're doing is you're just letting life happen and things don't change. And that's how I look at life for myself. Is yeah, I'll have those moments. And we've both talked about, we've had these moments where, life just gives you a swift kick in the butt, and you're stopped and stunned for a second, because you're thinking, well, what's happening? And you may not like what's going on, and maybe you're confused about what's going on, and it might keep you stuck for a little bit. But for Andy and I, what we've come to understand, especially because we're in this space, we understand that if we don't keep moving, like nothing happens. That we recognize that through relationships has helped us, our relationship has helped us to move forward.
Yeah.
And we get into the thick of things, and we get into the doing and the experiencing and the living and the decision making, in the good and the bad, taking each experience as something to learn from, whether it's a positive or a negative experience, and what we can learn from it and how we can use it to move to the next level of whatever we want to do with our lives. But I think what I love about this whole thing, about just life in general, is knowing and understanding that self-awareness is around everything, around our boundaries, right? It's around how we communicate. I think for Andy and I, we've talked about, he just talked about how our relationship evolved into something, but it's not so much that we sat down and had a conversation. Okay, this is how I want you to treat me. This is how I want to be treated. I think it just came from us doing our own inner work, that we came consciously to the table, willing to listen so that we could then have a conversation, so that we could set up these discussions that we have. But it's just fluid, and it's there's just ease and flow to it naturally, because we don't have this resistance of, well, if you don't speak the way I want, or if you don't say the things that I want to hear, then I don't want to have these conversations. And we've come knowing that there is this there's going to be times we don't agree necessarily, but we don't have to have a butting heads disagreement over something.
Right.
We can allow each other to have to say what we're saying, and listen to what the other person's saying, so we can understand their point of view, even if it's not our own, and be okay with that. And I think that's why our relationship has been as solid as it's been, without having to like sit down and say, like with most maybe romantic relationships, you sit down and you're just like, well, what are the expectations of what we each have around this relationship? That's important, but it's also equally important, I think, even more so in the communication process, is the listening part. To not listen to have a response, because I think that happens a lot. I am married to someone like that. He listens to respond. He's learning. It's a work in progress, but he's learning. And I think it's just because I've been on this journey, and that's kind of helped him be who he is. I've learned to listen more so I can understand him and his point of view, which has also helped him to see, oh, she's getting me. Now I can reciprocate that. And I think that's part of relationships, is that communication piece, is listening to understand. And that way you can respond from that place of, oh, I get what they're trying to say. Now I get it. Okay, maybe I don't necessarily agree with it, or maybe that wasn't my point of view, but now I get it. And that can, I think, help in your responses where you might have gone off, where you have maybe a better response, and you can have, instead of a full blown argument, to more of a discussion. And I think that is how my relationship has evolved with my husband over these past few years, because of that. So
Yeah.
that, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
It's powerful stuff, and we're over our time, as often is the case, and so I'm going to try to wrap up what we've been saying in this conversation. I think this first year of this channel has been about you and I really figuring out what this is going to look like, what the channel is going to look like, what this friendship is going to look like, what this collaboration is going to look like. And I think a lot of what we talked about in our year wrap up has been how you and I have both grown, both as individual people, as individual coaches, as people in our lives, but also in our relationship together, in our relationship with each other. We've grown to build something that we both now believe is going to be a lot longer term than what we originally had, kind of cautiously maybe hoped for. We were a little bit hesitant and a little bit, I don't know, right? As most of us are in the beginning, right? The commitment wasn't quite there, but now that we have worked for this much time, we both see the potential. We both see what we can create, and I'm so much looking forward to seeing what the next few years of this channel and all the other projects that we do together can bring. So thank you, everybody, for all that for listening to us, for participating in this channel, and for listening to our mostly 1 hour conversations.
Yeah. And I want us to say thank you, because for me, over the year, I think I've just learned a lot about what it being able to trust in relationships, and being able to trust this relationship, because this is a partnership that we had no idea. I mean, we'd known each other a little while, a few months, I mean, a year really.
Yeah.
And then we started doing this channel together. So I think it's just having that level of trust, I think really helped us to really say, okay, we can do this. So that's something I've learned over the year is just, yeah, that our friendship has grown. It's really impacted my life in a positive way. And just the things that we are doing together on other fronts is going to, I'm looking forward to 2022 and beyond and excited for what's coming. We are going to obviously have more conversations around what we want to cover. We kind of talked a little bit briefly about what we're looking forward to expanding on, but I'm excited for next year.
Me too.
And definitely excited to get the word out more about what this podcast is really all, not this podcast, this YouTube channel, which is kind of like a podcast. This YouTube channel, whoopsies, but yeah, real life, no script. But yeah,
No script.
I'm really looking forward to this, the
Me too.
conversations into next year and beyond. So thank you everyone so much for supporting us. If you are new, please take a look back over the year. We've had some amazing conversations. And if you want to hear more, make sure that you subscribe. If you like what we talked about today, press the like. But yeah, subscribe. Join us again for the next conversation. We're going to be talking in January. Our first conversation will be moving forward and what to look forward to for the next year and beyond. And so, again, thank you so much, Andy. It's been a pleasure working with you this year. I'm looking forward to next year and beyond.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Amazing.
It's been
so,
awesome.
Everyone, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and any resolutions that you make for the year, make sure that they're about you and that you take care of you, that you honor yourself, and just make sure that you learn to love the person staring back at you. Meet yourself right where you are right now. If you want to improve on any areas, that's okay too. But don't judge or criticize who you are. Just learn to love yourself and always adopt that growth mindset and learning who you are and how you can be a better person. So with that,
also know that we love you.
Yes.
We love you for being who you are.
Yes.
Also know that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. And with that, we're going to sign off. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye for now.